Welcome back to Karl Bodmer Live at the National Museum of Wildlife Art here in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. The last segment, I took you through my life up to the point of actually starting the expedition in St. Louis. Now this segment is all going to be about our wild western frontier expedition. So we started in St. Louis on April 10th, 1833, aboard the steamboat Yellowstone under the protection of the American Fur Company. Our intent was to retrace the Lewis and Clark route from 30 years earlier. So we did exactly that. We went from St. Louis up to Fort Pierre in modern-day South Dakota. We went to Fort Clark, which is near modern-day Bismarck, North Dakota. We went to Fort Union, which is on the Montana-North Dakota border, and then finally to Fort McKenzie in western Montana. In Fort McKenzie, we got to be stationed among the Blackfeet Indians. Now, some of you may know that the Blackfeet are not really known for their hospitality, but the prince just had a way with words and a way with people. And he was able to explain to them that our full intentions were just to sort of put them in the history books and precisely and accurately portray them to the Europeans and to anybody around the world. So they let us draw them, let us sketch them, and they came in their most beautiful ceremonial robes to do so. But on August 28th of 1833, the McKenzie battle broke out. The Assiniboine warriors came in and raided the Blackfeet Indians. Well, we didn't know if we were going to become the enemies or friends of the Assiniboine or now of the Blackfeet. It made us nervous. And I found myself in a doorway trapped between an Assiniboine warrior and a Blackfoot tribesman. I had nowhere to go. And the Assiniboine warrior looked me straight in the face and he said, "Step aside." So I did. Okay, fine. We weren't enemy or friend of anybody, but in the heat of war, anything goes. So we didn't want to stick around and find out. So we headed back downriver to spend the winter at Fort Clark. But on the way, our keel boat was raided by Gravant Indians. Luckily, all they really wanted were gifts, so we gave them whatever they asked for. We made it to Fort Clark among the Mandan and Hidatsa Indians. I was actually the last artist to rend the Mandan Indians in that habitat before the smallpox epidemic of 1837 nearly obliterated the tribe. This winter in Fort Clark proved to be one of the most horrific, terrifying winters of my life. It was so cold I couldn't sketch anything. All my watercolors froze. There wasn't any food, no bison meat. We survived almost entirely on cornmeal and biscuits. There were 3 days in January where the temperature got so cold. The first day, the mercury sank so low you could barely see it. The second day, it sunk so you couldn't even see it. And the third day, it just gave up and froze. Prince Maximilian ended up getting scurvy because of all the lack of nutrition. It was terrible. Finally, we made it out of there, safe and sound, in April of 1834, back to St. Louis. Instead of retracing our route that we came from the East Coast to St. Louis, we decided to take the northern route, past the Great Lakes and past Buffalo, New York, Albany, New York, finally out to New York. We left Great America July 16th of 1834, just over 2 years after first setting foot in Boston. We made it back to Europe safe and sound by the second week in August. Now, during this expedition, I painted pretty much whatever the prince asked me to. I painted the Indians, and I painted the flowers, and I painted the animals. But I did have a little opportunity to paint for myself. I got some wonderful Wabash River scenes, and I was able to paint some forest scenes. This is what I truly loved, back to my roots as a landscape artist. But, of course, I did paint the Indians. I painted the Hidatsa and the Mandan, the Blackfeet, the Sioux. I was able to paint the warriors and the chiefs and the dancers and the medicine men. A lot of people believe that my greatest accomplishment in my life was the ethnographic accuracy with which I portrayed their ceremonial robes and their objects, their body markings, their clothing, anything about them. Now, I didn't just paint people. I also painted animals. I was able to paint many, many different types of animals from North America. My ability to rend animals and people excelled profoundly during this trip. It had to, I didn't have a choice. The prince demanded it. So I was able to paint all of these animals that David trapped for us. Most of the animals I painted were dead by the time I got to them. But I tried to give them a little life. Make it look as though they were in some sort of a habitat. I didn't want to return to Europe with a notebook full of dead animals. With the exception of the white-tailed deer and the lynx. They were a couple of my first studies, so I left them well enough alone. So I gave all these animals life, and I was able to paint various bison stampedes and kills. I was able to paint turtles and squirrels and foxes, all of these different animals, to bring back to Europe and show people what these animals truly looked like, instead of the artist renderings of people's notebooks. Now, a lot of people are curious how I was able to take these 400 plus sketches and watercolors and transport them from Fort McKenzie back down the river to St. Louis, past all the Indians, and then back to the East Coast, and safe and sound overseas to Europe. Well, truthfully, it wasn't all that hard. My job was simple. I just simply had to paint and sketch. Then I handed them over to Prince Max. He put them all in steamer trunks and set them sail back to St. Louis, and then via boat and stagecoach back to the East Coast, and then shipped back to Europe. Even that being the case, getting 400 plus watercolors and sketches back through all of that back to Europe was a pretty amazing feat. Now was to come what proved to be the more difficult part of our journey, taking all of these sketches and paintings and turning them into a saleable form, the atlas. The toils of making the engravings, finding an audience for our amazing masterpiece, producing it all in a manner which, unbeknownst to us, was about to go completely out of style. All to come in the next segment of Karl Bodmer Live.